From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 6 clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
I'm an outdoorsman. I love bird dogs, and I love chasing behind them as they chase quail. Those aren't my words. I love dogs, don't get me wrong. But my Rhodesian Ridgeback only chases squirrels in New York City, and he gives up the hunt pretty fast. No, that was the instant response on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange the other day when my colleague Matt Kobach, who oversees social media for Intercontinental Exchange, asked Sonny Perdue, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, what he likes to do in his spare time. The problem is, Secretary Perdue doesn't have much spare time to speak of. I was at a breakfast down in Boca Raton, Florida, where the Secretary spoke with our own Chairman and CEO, Jeff Sprecher, and I shared a table with his team, those who travel with him from state to state. In just 2 years on the job, Perdue has been to 49 states, surveying the challenges and opportunities for U.S. agriculture, and the 50th state on the list, Utah, was scheduled for an upcoming visit. By the time you hear this podcast, who knows? It might have already been checked off the list. Every state in the union has a stake in the future of U.S. agriculture. The Secretary will be quick to ask this rhetorical question. What happens when populations increase, but the total amount of farming land stays the same? I think you and I both know the answer. That was the purpose of Sonny Perdue's visit to the NYSE, to convene industry leaders, along with farmers, ranchers, and producers to talk about the intersection of agriculture, technology, and innovation with a goal, which he repeats over and over, to do right and feed everyone. We have a technological explosion in precision agriculture right now. We talked about it a few weeks ago on this show with Tim Hassinger, the CEO of Lindsay Corporation, and we're going to dive even deeper with Secretary Sonny Perdue. We're proud to bring you his conversation with ICE's chief, Jeff Sprecher, from the stage of the ICE Energy Breakfast at the Futures Industry Association, recorded live in Boca Raton, Florida. I think you'll find him, as I did, thoughtful, engaging, reflective, wicked funny, and very, very wise. Jeff Sprecher's conversation with Sonny Perdue right after this.
As U.S. oil markets evolve and production continues to increase, exports have risen to meet demand for light, sweet crude. The ICE Permian WTI futures contract reflects this changing landscape with price discovery, settlement, and delivery in Houston. Transported directly from the Permian on the BridgeTex and Longhorn pipelines, this well-known quality crude can be shipped across the globe from multiple ports along the Gulf Coast and offers additional hedging and trading opportunities in a transparent electronic marketplace. Intercontinental Exchange, shaping tomorrow's oil markets.
Sonny Perdue was born into a farming family in Bonaire, Georgia, before embarking on a career that took him flying around the globe. But he was always rooted in the land. Sonny left the family farm to serve in the Air Force. He's still a rotary and fixed-wing pilot, and then received a doctorate in veterinary medicine from the University of Georgia, operating a private practice after that. He then entered public service, serving 11 years in the Georgia State Legislature and 2 terms as that state's governor. After leaving office, he began a career in agribusiness, where he focused on commodities and transportation in enterprises that have spanned the southeastern United States, before President Trump nominated him to become the 31st Secretary of Agriculture on April 25th, 2017. So put on your Levi's, lace up your Chippewa boots, and mount the John Deere Combine. We're now joining Secretary Perdue in conversation with Jeff Sprecher, the founder, chairman, and CEO of Intercontinental Exchange, live on stage at the ICE Energy Breakfast at FIA Boca. The next voice you'll hear is that of Jeff Sprecher. Take it away, Jeff.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. It's thrilled to have somebody from the administration come and talk to us. And so we have quite an international crowd here, but we meet in the U.S. every year. And the U.S., in my mind, is the home for agriculture, derivatives, and hedging. And, these are products and things that we really invented here that we've exported around the world. I gave just a quick introduction because I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. You're currently in the administration, but you're not necessarily a career politician. So you grew up on a farm, right?
I did.
In rural Georgia, and became a veterinarian. I'm assuming that part of your background was animals. Is that the kind of farm you grew up on?
That's correct. A diversified row crop farm as well as a dairy farm. So I was probably influenced by our local veterinarian that came and treated our cows was my inspiration.
Yeah. And then you represented that district in the state of Georgia and ultimately became the Georgia governor.
Correct.
So what made you decide to leave the farm and go to the big city and get into politics?
I got too close and they pushed me in. I was actually serving on Planning and Zoning Commission, and our local community was a transitioning county. It had been typically agrarian. It had been that peach plain where all the peach reputation of Georgia in middle Georgia had come from. And it was agrarian, but it's also home to a big military industrial complex, Robins Air Force Base. Yes. So it was growing and transitioning, and planning and zoning was a challenge. And I remember the commissioners, it was an appointed position. When they asked me to serve, they said, you don't have any political ambition, do you? And I said, no, and I really didn't. We were growing our business, had family, home, civic responsibility. They said, good, with this job, you won't need any. But if you know anything about planning and zoning, it can be challenging. But it was the best training session to listen to people about their passions of their property and their community.
Right. And after you became Georgia governor, you went back into agriculture, right? And trading and shipping and storing.
After I became a veterinarian, I practiced for only about 6 years, and I laughingly say I had too much red clay between my toes. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a great place, great partners, great practice, but I really wanted to get back to agriculture and food and that business. So we came back and went into the grain business there. So I'm excited to be here among this industry because we committed ourselves to be dedicated hedgers from the very beginning. So I'm very familiar with markets and hedging and trading, and that's kind of what the career was. After I became governor, I thought that's what Thomas Jefferson had envisioned with his country, come out, do public service, and go back and do what you were doing. So that's what I did.
Wow. But then President Trump called.
He did.
And said, you're going to leave the farm again and go to Washington, D.C. So was that a tough decision for you at this point in your life?
Well, again, yes, it was tough, but I think most people feel as if when they're called to serve like that and that sort of environment, I think probably the toughest thing was divesting of that business that was probably potentially conflicted, the USDA secretary. I had no idea of all the ethical requirements that would be done. I might have thought differently, but nonetheless, that was the biggest challenge, I think, in becoming Secretary of Agriculture.
So President Trump ran very publicly on a policy of trade, felt that many of our trade deals were not up to par, wanted to redo them. That resonated in a lot of the agricultural states that ultimately probably helped him get elected. And so now you get dropped in and the president wants to redo trade deals. So maybe we start with NAFTA and the Canada-Mexico relationship. How did that go for you, and how do you feel about the outcome of that?
Very interesting. Obviously, I think President Trump's views over a number of years were that we were getting out-traded internationally in many ways, and felt like many of the trilateral, multilateral deals that we had done, that he has since unwound some of them, were not in the best interest of America. You can either agree or disagree with his policies, but I can tell you he is truly America first, and I think that's what his motivation was. I was sworn in, and very quickly and during the campaign, I think his views were primarily influenced possibly by the auto workers and those that had lost a number of jobs and businesses to Mexico with the NAFTA that was in place. So he was determined it was not a very good deal. I remember I was supposed to meet with Secretary Wilbur Ross of Commerce one afternoon, and he called me about earlier that day and said, what would happen if we withdrew from NAFTA for agriculture? And after a
What
large,
was your answer?
a huge gasp, I said, what? And he said, well, the president is saying he's going to do that. You need to come on over to the White House. So I quickly gathered up some maps and went to the White House. I walked in. It was sort of comical, actually. If you write a book, this is the kind of stuff this is the kind of stuff you don't think about. But his tall security guy, Keith, was there, who I had met in New York, and we'd kind of become buddies and just, conversation. And it was in the early days of administration. There was not a lot of organization. And I walked in and I said, Keith, I need to see the boss. He opens the door to the Oval Office and says, Mr. President, Sonny wants to see you. And he said, be about 10 minutes. So I went in, and there was a small group of people there discussing withdrawing from NAFTA. And fortunately, I had taken some influential maps that showed the president where his voting support had come from, which was the heartland of America, and he was influenced by it. He was so influenced, I laughed the other day. I sent him a big, large frame map after that, and him deciding to do something different. But when the vice premier of China was in the office this last time a couple of weeks ago, he brought the big map out and showed all of his geographical voting support across the country and how important agriculture was to him. That's when he's making the point. I know all this technology, we got to get all this intellectual property thing, but we're going to take care of our farmers.
That's great. And so the deal that ultimately got cut, is it good for agriculture?
The mantra, obviously, with the great gasp and sucking sound from agriculture withdrawing from NAFTA, most everyone in ag sector thought that NAFTA had been relatively and very good to agriculture, and for the most part it had. There may be some produce or seasonal perishable vegetable people that had not fared good down in this part of the country and maybe southern Georgia, but for the most part, NAFTA was viewed as very positive. Mm-hmm. So the mantra became, first of all, do no harm.
Right.
First of all, do no harm. And I think if you look at the USMCA agreement that Ambassador Lighthizer negotiated, go section by section, article by article, line by line, I would submit to you that in every aspect, from labor, from safety, from biotech, from phytosanitary issues, it is an improved agreement, and I think it benefits this nation, and I think it's a better deal. There are varying degrees, marginally so in some places, and larger in others. I believe it will be passed. I know politics hopefully will not get in the way of this as it has in maybe border security, but people will vote their districts and what's in the best interest of America.
That's good. And just kind of moving around the globe, the president has agitated, I guess I would say, in Europe, particularly maybe in Germany, a lot of probably around automobiles. Is agriculture negotiation moving in Europe now, or is there conversation or tone change around how we deal with exports and imports to Europe, or is that off the table right now?
I would love to say yes, but I'm afraid not. I think I heard a little clip of Ambassador Lighthizer's testimony to Congress yesterday, and I think it's reported that a real stalemate over agriculture regarding the EU. The president's is very much influenced by the trade deficit. While many economists and maybe even I don't necessarily agree with the fact that trade deficits lead to an outflow of capital, I think he is persuaded that trade deficits are a real raid on the Treasury and the future prosperity of America in that way. And to some degree, when it comes to NATO and those kind of things, where we have, since World War II, have supported and been the policeman for the world, essentially, certainly in Europe, Eastern and Western Europe, in that way, then I think he's right to assume those developing nations, we're not rebuilding Germany anymore, we're not rebuilding South Korea. Those are vibrant economies that have been riding really on the Uncle Sam's coattails of international security in that way.
Right.
So I think he's done that. I think also in the trade issues, he feels that we've been taking advantage of in maybe our tariffs. He's really talking more about reciprocal tariffs. We're a very fluent society. We're a very fluent nation, and we like nice things, and Europe makes some nice cars, and they have a great market here. And what had been happening with NAFTA, they'd been transversing that, certainly with any tariffs at all, by building those cars, sending them to Mexico, and then importing them here in the United States. So he's concerned about that. Europe has been very intransigent, intractable about willing to deal with agriculture. We see a very severe protectionist environment over there in the EU. It's very frustrating because you've got 28 nations. I'll go to speak with nations about agricultural trade, and they'll be very supportive of us from a biotechnology perspective, but then they run very quickly under the umbrella of the EU, and it's extremely frustrating to deal and to trade in that sort of environment.
Yeah. Well, as yesterday we saw a vote for someone to actually try to leave, right?
Yeah.
The big negotiation that is in the news right now is China. Obviously, massively growing country over the last decade or two, has to feed their people. Agriculture's got to be a big part of that conversation too, I would assume.
Well, that's a huge part, and that's one of the reasons they've been thus far a huge consumer of U.S. ag exports. And I think, again, Jeff, we've got to step back and think about the productivity of American agriculture over the last 70 years. And I've told the president this. I think, again, the investments we've made in basic research, applied research, and the delivery system of an extension service, it's an amazing productivity machine out there, and getting even more productive. I think we're seeing the coming of the digitization of agriculture, from sensors and optics and things like that. It's going to be exponential as we go, and we need it, because pretty soon we're going to have 9 to 9.5, 10 billion people on this earth, and all of them are going to want to eat. And the problem that China had was, anytime you have a growing economy, you need to have an assimilation of those poor into a middle class, and China has done that very successfully. But they have certainly food demands, one of the first things, and diet they want to improve. Now, unfortunately, the president believes, and I concur with him, that much of the Chinese economy has grown at the expense of captivating other people's innovation and technology through transfers of technology, through forced transfers, through cyber theft, and through illegal transfer of intellectual property. They are good at it, and they've been state-sponsored in a way that has done that over a number of years, grown a very good economy with a very strategic goal of becoming world dominant in those areas, and so stated in their 2025 plan. The president, I think, to his courage, has thrown the flag on that methodology of transfer of intellectual property. America is still a great innovator, a great creator. The capital structure that this room helps to develop and risk-taking allows to, and the laying off of risk allows this environment, this economy here, to be great innovators and great creators of new technology. And yet, when you have someone subsume that and take it as their own, and not have to spend the millions of dollars that we have in research over pharmaceuticals, technology, and other things in R&D, then you can be pretty hefty economy, and that's what's happened.
Right.
So my question to ag community was that, had China become dependent on us as a consumer, or had we been as a producer, or had we become dependent upon them as a consumer? And I think that's a rhetorical question. I think we kind of know the answer.
That soon. And turning to another policy issue, for my foreign friends in the audience, the United States passed an agriculture bill. It's not easy to pass bills in the United States anyway. And for some reason, the agriculture bill always becomes very controversial. So you inherited that and helped push that through. Can you talk a little about what was in that bill? Is it a good bill? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think the farm bill that was passed on December of 2018 was relatively a good bill. I think the good thing about it was in 2014 there was sort of a change, beginning to utilize crop insurance, producer-funded crop insurance to a large degree. It has some federal support as well, but by and large to allow producers to be their own risk managers in their production and their safety net. What level safety net do you want in that regard based on your own situation, rather than having a top-down, everyone gets this kind of thing? Let producers decide from their risk management how they want to do. So it was the 18 bill was somewhat evolutionary in that, continuing that premise of the safety net primary safety net being crop insurance. We made further strides in specialty crops that are coming on and different types of things. It's like any insurance program, you have to have a good actuarial sound basis to price insurance on. So I think it was a real improvement certainly in the production side from farmers. It was a huge improvement in the dairy side. Mm-hmm. And I'm concerned it's really a little bit that the dairy sector has been under extreme duress and financial stress over the last 3 or 4 years. I'm concerned that the Farm Bill may even encourage more overproduction in that market rather than them constraining themselves in that with the new farm program in dairy. So we're working very diligently to get that implemented. Most people in the room know that when Congress passes a law or a bill, they can't get totally point to point on all the issues. So agencies have to step in and develop the granularity of rules and regulations of what was the intention of this law, how is it to be utilized, how is it to be complied with. And that's what we're in the process of doing right now. I'm a big believer in the 3 branches of government. I believe it's Congress's role to pass the laws, but nonetheless, we had they call it technical assistance. There were about 2,000 episodes of technical assistance where Congress asked us on both sides, what happens if we do this? Mm-hmm. If we push here, where does it push out at? Right. So we were able to work hand in glove with them. I didn't think it was a responsibility of USDA to write the farm bill, but we advised and counseled them over what we think would work and what wouldn't work. I think certainly in the production ag improvement, dairy specifically, the cotton program as well, but then conservation areas. I think we moved to more market-based type of conservation and tying up land and CRP. Senator Thune had a provision where you wouldn't have to be 15 or 20 years. You could do it in 3 or 5 year segments in that way from a land rest. I think from a research perspective, I think it's making a lot of efforts in soil health and those kind of things that I believe will be the basis of a lot of productivity gain in the near future. It dealt with some other issues that from a supplemental nutrition standpoint, what we call food stamps. Obviously, the House had a provision over eliminating the waiver for able-bodied working adults, those without dependents that can work. Go back to the original law that allowed for 120 days on food stamps during that period of time. The Senate rejected that, and ultimately that was not in the bill. But that was a large discussion over the supplemental nutrition portion. The way the Farm Bill really works is you've got people who are concerned about the consumers, and you've got members who are concerned about the farmers, and they come together and form a coalition to pass the Farm Bill.
Another area, another hot button that I assume you've inherited is that agriculture needs a lawful workforce, trained workforce, notwithstanding the mechanization of agriculture. You still need people that are in the fields, and obviously in the United States we're having a big debate over immigration policy. Have you seen any positive or negative trends, or are there things you're working on as an agency to try to help agribusiness find lawful workers?
Sure. Let's set the context of how serious the issue is. As I travel around the country, and I just told you and Kelly this morning, I've been to 49 states since May of 17, so we'll click off our 50th this year. But where I go, there are three issues that continually come up among our constituents in the agricultural sector. First is trade, as you might imagine. Second is always labor and a legal farm workforce. And the third is regulation. I think most farmers and agriculturalists give this administration a good grade on regulation. They are giving the benefit of the doubt on trade, but they are really hurting on farm labor. And certainly in more of the specialty crops, more of the high-touch type crops, it's a real challenge. You may recall a program called H2A, where you could bring in temporary guest workers, import them from different countries, primarily Mexico. But that's been extremely onerous. The goal was to protect any American worker, and there's an adverse wage rate that's determined. You have to provide transportation, housing, health care, and those kind of things to these workers. And the rules of engaging them, getting them here, had become extremely onerous. We got a lady from Farm Bureau who had worked on labor issues. That's been her sole job since I've been at USDA, is to help try to smooth out the H2A program as a temporary measure. That's not the ultimate solution, but we're making some progress with the Department of Labor. There are three other agencies, the interagency concept. Department of Labor, Homeland Security, and Department of State have the three primary statutory responsibilities over the H2A program.
Gotcha.
But what we've done is create a farmer-facing portal tool called farmers.gov that's almost kind of like a TurboTax model. What farmers were having is sending one application into labor, one application into DHS, and if they didn't match up perfectly, if the T was crossed at a different angle, almost a little hyperbolic, but they would get it back, and then they're just delayed. So we're doing a kind of like checking the homework before you turn it in on TurboTax, and I think that will help to some degree. We're making some regulatory changes in that program. That's not the real answer. We need a comprehensive immigration program that deals with a reliable legal workforce in agriculture, along with refugee status, asylum, border security, all those kind of things. And that's what we're telling the administration and Congress that we tried last year. Chairman Goodlatte and Judiciary in the House had a good temporary labor bill, a guest worker program there. We never could get a vote on. But I think we've got to wrap it up into almost like we do the Farm Bill. There's got to be something there for everybody, from border security to dealing with the asylum issues, to deal with refugee status, to deal with a transition for people who've been here illegally into a legal work status that way. So hopefully we can get that done. Agriculture needs it. A huge percentage of agricultural workers are foreign-born. We know that. There are not many parents out here in the audience that are aspiring for their children to go pick tomatoes. And that's just a fact that we've got to deal with here in this country, and we need to do it very quickly.
You touched on innovation in a number of your responses. Why don't we talk a little about that? I happen to know, because I married into a farming family, that what's going on in Kelly's family farm is the equipment's getting bigger and more complicated and more expensive, and more training. Productivity's going up as a result of that. Farmers are pooling together to get scale, to amortize big equipment over more acreage, that kind of thing. What are you seeing? Are you talk a little bit about this innovation trend, and do you see it in the numbers? Are you seeing it?
We are seeing it. I don't think it's almost too stretched to talk about the beginning of a fourth industrial revolution when I see the digitization of agriculture that's happening with the sensor technology, the optics technology, the connectivity we have. And I want to talk about broadband before we leave, because that's going to be the ultimate leveler here in rural America. But most good farmers, Kelly's dad and family, you know, they did the algorithms up here, and the better farmers were better at it, and you could see from their yields and growing and getting better and bigger, then the better farmers did all those algorithms here. Now we are seeing but they did it on an analog basis. They didn't know the digit.
Right.
They just knew analog, this was a better practice. Now we're seeing big data coming together with all the type of reporting opportunities we have out here over what I call the digitalization of agriculture. And there are some really gee whiz type of precision agriculture things that are already on the OEM shelf out here that we could deploy today if we had broadband connectivity in a ubiquitous fashion across America. And I think this race to 5G, we're in touch with people now over a 5G network across America, and what a difference that would make from a productivity standpoint. Let me just give you a little example. I was at the Farm Progress Show in the summer of 17, and I didn't truth fact this area, but we had the precision planter and the tractor, autonomous tractor there with sub-inch technology. This was in an RTK field where you could do sub-inch technology. That tractor could guide itself.
Wow.
Where the furrow was ripped up in the fall, placed with fertilizer right in that furrow, allow the soil to cure over the winter by thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing and assimilating that. And then in the spring, come back in that same sub-inch technology and put the seed down. 40% less inputs and a 20 bushel per acre yield. Wow. Now that's exponential productivity gains. That's almost equal to what we've seen from a genetics perspective,
right,
going forward very quickly. So that combined with new science we're learning about soil health and how we can capture carbon, that's another exciting field about how we can really begin to talk about agriculturalists with good practices and soil health becoming carbon capturers, not carbon emitters in that way. And if we could develop a carbon market for you traders out there, then incentivizing farmers to utilize best practices, because we were putting not capturing just 1% carbon in the soil, but 3 to 7%. That's huge numbers of carbon capture and CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. Wow. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. The technology is there. We see optic technology that are spraying just the noxious weeds as it goes there. Again, less input, less environmental footprint, and other types of sensor data with variable rate planters, testing out the soil moisture of how deep to plant. There's some exciting things out there happening in agriculture, and that's why trade continues to be a big issue, because if we continue to produce more than we can consume in this nation, then we've got to find a market for it.
And let's end on a positive note. What I assume will be a positive note in our industry. in our industry here in financial services, we're going through a fintech revolution. There are lots of entrepreneurs coming up with things that could disintermediate companies like mine, large incumbents. Are you seeing entrepreneurs flock to some of this ag technology?
Yeah. We are. I was in New York just last week at the Alexandria Summit of Ag Innovation. Some really, really exciting things happening in biogenetics and certainly in soil health, as we talked about, and in data collection and utilizing data. And again, I put it in a big umbrella of the digitization of using specific data to inform decisions in production agriculture that make a huge difference. We had Dr. Uma Valetti there with Memphis Meats talking about technology of growing protein from stem cells there. So wow, a lot of things going on in the sector that we need to be alert to, and a lot of a lot of private equity money, certainly mostly coming out of Silicon Valley, understanding the need for food going forward, and a lot of innovation in the basic proponents: water quality, water sources, soil, arable land, those kind of things.
Yeah. And have you seen, millennials love things that are organic? Are you seeing this move to...
Sure, the market is the market, and you see it in the grocery store. And unfortunately, we've had a good experience from an organic perspective. They've done a wonderful job marketing. I think we've had a more negative response over GMOs. That's part of the technology that we've used to increase productivity. And for you and me, when I knew it was bad when I walked down the aisle of the hair products aisle in the grocery store, not that I planned to stop, but when I saw non-GMO shampoo, I knew we'd reached a new high. So that's it's been used as a negative.
Well, let's end on that note, actually.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Sonny Perdue, the Secretary of Agriculture, who joined Intercontinental Exchange Chairman, CEO, and founder Jeff Sprecher live on stage at FIA Boca. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at IceHousePodcast. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Teresa DeLuca and Ian Wolfe, with production assistance from Ken Abel. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.